This happened to me in the back end of 2022. I'm from the Midlands, UK. I live alone in a usually quiet and non-eventful area, where some may say is boring. I work a lot of late shifts, so my friend often crashes at my place from time to time, having a spare key and letting himself in to chill and help out with the place. One evening, after I'd finished work, I returned home and was looking forward to zoning out and relaxing after what had already been a busy week. Tired and ready for the weekend, it still seemed like the week was dragging, so with no plans of my friend coming around that evening, I decided I'd make some food, prep for work, and have an early night. Having finished all my tasks and having made some quick food, which consisted of a ready meal nuked in the microwave, not the best I know, but the quickest option, as I didn't have the motivation to cook fresh that night, I relaxed and watched some Netflix whilst letting my food go down. Before I knew it, it was nearing midnight. I couldn't believe where the time had gone, as always, so I took myself off to bed, knowing I had an early start the next day. Clockwork, as they say. That night I was settled, but something woke me. As I broke from my peaceful slumber, I could hear the sound of talking downstairs. As I sat up, I listened out, as I broke from the groggy-like state I found myself in, just waking up. I could have swore I heard a laugh from outside my room, and that's what woke me. Had I been dreaming and woke myself up? Dreaming the laugh, or had I actually heard something? As I moved around, sitting up on the edge of my bed, I looked at the time. With it being 2:30 a.m, I couldn't hear anything now. So assuming I had been dreaming, I took a sip of water before looking to get back to sleep. That was until I heard the undeniable sound of my TV from downstairs, blaring static. I froze mid-sip, the glass of water in my hand. What the fuck? I was pretty sure I'd turned off the TV before coming to bed. Standing up, I moved towards my bedroom door as I slowly opened it. I could see the glowing light from the TV downstairs. Had I left it on? Exiting my bedroom, I went to head downstairs, but froze in my tracks as a ball of fear built in the pit of my stomach. From questioning myself while leaving the TV on, it was then the real situation hit me like a ton of bricks. The TV went from static to channel as it changed. Someone was in my house. I felt myself getting hot as my heart began to race as I stood at the top of my stairs. When the thought popped into my head, my friend often stayed over and actually had a spare key. Thinking surely that was the case and he had just let himself in, probably from a drunken night out, I slowly descended the stairs as I called out his name. As I reached the bottom and turned the corner looking into the room, the colour drained from my skin. Sitting on the sofa was not my friend, but the sight of a gaunt-looking lady with matted hair, as she slowly turned, looking and smiling at me with wide eyes. Frozen to the spot, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. This woman looked like a crack addict. As she just sat there smiling at me, I finally managed to break out of my shock-like state as I screamed, "What the hell are you doing in my house? Who are you?" My demanding questions fell on deaf ears, as the smile vanished from the woman's face, as she let out a blood-curdling scream as she picked up a glass off my table, throwing it at me. I just about managed to avoid being hit square in the face with it as it smashed on the wall behind me. Looking back in anger, the woman's eyes raged as she again screamed, running towards me. My heart racing, not knowing who this crazed woman was, I ran back up the stairs, slamming my door shut as I locked it and grabbed my phone, calling the police. As they answered and I told them the situation, someone had broken into my house. It was then there was knocking at my bedroom door. "The police are on the way," I shouted. The knocking continued, followed by a hauntingly calm voice as they said, "Come out. It's okay. We can talk." "What are you doing in my house?" What the fuck, I thought. Your house? She was clearly crazy. I told the operator on the line what was happening and to hurry. As the police were en route, the knocking continued, and the terrifying giggle of the woman sounded from the other side of the door as she repeated the same words. "Come out. We can talk. What are you doing in my house?" That was what felt like the longest wait for the police ever. As they arrived, the woman never left. They arrived to find her stood on the other side of my door, still knocking, with her ear pressed up against the door. As the police arrested her, she just smiled at them, asking who I was. When I was finally able to open and exit my room to talk to the officers, the woman was being escorted away. Not before our eyes met one last time, as she stared at me with that crazed, psychotic look. It was later found out that the woman was a patient at a nearby psychiatric facility that had somehow wandered and escaped from the grounds. And it was not just a coincidence that it was my house she wandered into, as I found out that the house I lived in was her last home before whatever happened in her life caused her to be in a psych ward. How she entered was through the back window in the downstairs bathroom, as it was left open by me. That night will always stick with me as one of the craziest and scariest moments of my life. A surreal situation to find myself in, but now I'm sure to always check all my doors and windows and make sure they're locked at night. I used to live alone before I met my fiancée, and this was an experience that I never thought would happen to me, and it was a horrifying one at that. Something that I always look back on and still makes my skin crawl. This event happened over the course of a few nights. I lived in a regular-sized, detached house that's on your standard street, a normal, quiet community, and never much out of the ordinary. One evening, I was getting myself ready for bed, doing my usual routine. I'd been out all day, so I was catching up with usual household tasks, cleaning up, taking out the garbage, and prepping everything for work the next day. After getting everything sorted and taking a minute to chill out, I decided to have an early night, knowing I'd be up early the next morning. It was that night I was restless. You can never seem to sleep and switch off when you've had a few days off, so when I woke feeling like I'd heard something, I rolled over checking the time. It was then I could have sworn I saw a figure move past my bedroom door. That caused me to shoot up, my heart racing. I listened out as I sat there, eyes glued to the open door frame. But I couldn't hear or see anything. Swallowing the ball of fear back down my throat, I got out of bed and walked over to the doorway, walking out into the hall. The hallway was empty. And as I slowly made my way around the house, checking from room to room, the house was empty. Feeling relieved that that was the case, I still checked all the doors and windows were locked. I mean, half asleep or not, I must have been dreaming, but it sure felt real in the moment. After calming myself and seeing nobody had broken into my house, I headed back to bed, managing to get some sleep. The next night, when arriving home from work, I arrived back home to find my burglar alarm going off. A wave of panic hitting me, I rushed in to investigate. My front door was locked. Opening it up and looking inside, there was no sign of a break-in. I didn't know what had set the alarm off, if something had tripped or if there was a dodgy wiring on one of the sensors. But again, I was relieved to see that everything was okay. Resetting my alarm, I once again checked around the house just to make sure. Having completed my checks, I finally settled in, got myself comfy and began to relax before heading to bed. That night, as I slept, I woke suddenly, as if a bolt of lightning hit me. My intruder alarm began blaring in the house. Heart racing, I jumped out of bed as I grabbed the nearest thing to a weapon, which ended up being a golf club, that I gripped tightly as I ran to my stairs, looking down. As I slowly approached the alarm panel, I silenced the alarm. Again, looking around the house, there was no open entry points or any sign of a break-in. I remember thinking, what the hell was going on? There must have been a fault with the alarm. But that feeling you get, when at first you think you have an intruder in the house, it's horrible. A feeling that scares you, fills you with panic. After seeing everything was clear and then thinking back to the night before, and the thought of me thinking I saw a figure pass my room, now my mind was racing, thinking of all sorts. Now, I'm not one who believes in the paranormal, but even that crossed my mind with my thoughts running wild. Was I having a paranormal experience? Was there an entity present? After calming and realizing how crazy I sounded, I reeled in my thoughts to a more rational explanation and put it down to a fault in the alarm system. And deciding the next day, I would get in touch with the company to arrange for an engineer to come and check the system over. The adrenaline still running through my body, I headed back to bed to try and get some sleep. Having not slept much that night, the next morning I did just that. I called the company and they were quick to schedule an engineer to come out later that day to check everything out to see what the issue was. When they arrived, I took them through what had been happening and the events of the last few nights. The engineer said he would check over the alarm panel to see if it registered any faults anywhere and what area it was that had tripped. He also then checked the control panel which had been installed inside the attic. After he checked the alarm panel, he couldn't see any faults or issues with the alarm panel itself. The sensors scattered around the house were also intact. Asking me to lead him to the control panel, I escorted him to the attic, where he said he was going to check for any loose wiring or damage that rodents may have caused, as that was common. As he ascended the ladder, his flashlight lit up the opening as he hoisted himself in. I stood at the bottom as the light faded the further he crawled in. I asked him if he had located the panel or if he could see what the problem was. I was met with silence. I called again, asking if he was okay, and again, no answer. I was just about to climb the ladder when the engineer's legs began to descend the ladder. As he said, there doesn't seem to be an issue with the panel, as he quickly climbed down. He turned looking at me, and I noticed straight away the pale complexion and look of shock on his face. Confused, I asked if he was okay, looking back before pulling me to the side and out of view. It was then the engineer whispered to me, "Please be quiet and don't react." React to what? I thought. Then, what he said next. "But there's a man in your loft, hiding behind a set of boxes." Hitting me like a sledgehammer to the chest. What he told me made me feel sick. There was a man up in my attic, telling me to remain calm and quiet. The engineer told me to call the police, whilst he closed the loft. My heart racing, I quickly went downstairs, grabbing my phone as I called the police, explaining the situation. The police were quick to arrive, as I escorted them into the house and to the loft, where thankfully the engineer had stayed to keep an eye on. When they entered the loft, what they found still sends chills down my spine. They found a gaunt, scrawny man hiding in my attic, with a blanket and empty food wrappers. As they escorted him down, he didn't seem fazed. He was smiling as he stared right at me with his wide eyes. It looked like he was an addict. From what was found, it looked like that person had been squatting in my attic for a good week or so. It was found he was a homeless man, and that he must have snuck in when I was at work one of the days, leading us to believe I had left a window open by mistake, which would have been his entry point. I am thankful to the engineer for remaining calm upon discovering the man, as if it wasn't for him, I think I would have panicked, and the scary thing is, who knows how long he would have been up there, if not found, or what he may have been capable of. It's terrifying to know that someone was squatting in your house and coming out at night while you slept. It haunts me to know that when I thought I was dreaming when I saw a figure pass by my door, it was actually real, and that man was in my house. I still think of it to this day, and have paranoia that someone is in my house. I always make sure all my doors and windows are locked after that experience, as it's something I'd never care to experience again. I'm a 25-year-old male who lives by myself in an apartment complex in my city, Detroit. The area I live in is, to be honest, not the best. It's a rough neighborhood, and crime is pretty high with the wrong type of people around. But my current living situation is due to change after this incident happened to me not too long ago. I'm not usually home a lot, with either work or going out to see friends, but recently I found myself staying in a bit more than I would usually like. The reason for that is doing some online courses to try and get into the job field I want to. I'm pretty much on my laptop most evenings, and I'm a chilled out, laid back kind of guy. I was studying one of my courses late one evening when there was a loud bang on my door. It was around midnight, so I thought it was strange as I wasn't expecting anybody to drop by. Anyway, I put my laptop aside and went to my door to see who it was. As I opened it slightly, I could see a man pacing outside my door, who I noticed as a guy who had recently moved in next door to me. He had been there about a week, so I opened the door more, asking him if he was okay and what was up. When he acknowledged me, he stopped pacing and stared directly at me with a blank expression for about a good 30 seconds, which I found weird. When I again was about to ask him why he had knocked, he suddenly spoke, cutting me off. He banged his hand, resting it on my door as he leaned in towards me, saying, "You need to be quiet in there. I can hear you moving and being loud and it's pissing me off." Taken aback by this, I said, "Excuse me?" I was confused as I was literally just sat in my apartment on my laptop, no TV or no music on, nothing that could remotely be loud. "I can hear you, and if it continues, you won't want me coming back round again." Stunned by this, as I'd only ever spoken to this guy once, saying, "Hey," when he'd moved in. But from looking at him now and his actions, I could tell he was on something. I said, "Look, I'm not sure what you're on about. It can't be me. I'm just about to go to sleep, okay? So you won't be hearing anything anyway. And if you do, it's not from me." Annoyed and confused by the sudden encounter, I said my piece and shut the door. As I did, I could hear the guy mumbling something to himself outside as he walked back to his apartment and slammed the door. After that, I couldn't concentrate at all, as all I was thinking was, what the hell was he on about? I hadn't been doing anything. So, calling it a night, I packed my stuff away and went to bed. Not long after I did, I could again hear this arsehole talking aloud, and he followed that by banging on the wall between our apartments. What the hell was this guy's problem, I thought. I really wanted to bang back at that moment, but I'm not the most confrontational guy, and thought to myself he's clearly on drugs, and he probably wouldn't remember this in the morning, even though that isn't an excuse, but I let it go. And sure enough, there was no more banging, and I managed to fall asleep without any more commotion that night. The next evening, when I returned from work, I was walking up my hallway as I was about to pass the guy's apartment next to mine. I slowly went past, listening to see if I could hear anything, but I couldn't. I was pretty sure he wasn't home. In the moment, I'd had in mind knocking on and talking about the night before, but I thought better of it. From seeing what type of person he was, I didn't want the hassle, and just hoped it was a one-off and wouldn't happen again. I continued to my apartment to chill out for the night and do some more studying. Later that night, as I was finishing up on my laptop, tired from a long day, I decided it was time to get some sleep, as I had an early start in the morning. As I was shutting down and listening to the end of a song through my headphones, I could hear the distinct sound of banging coming from my front door. The banging was aggressively hard as I could feel the shudder of the door from where I was sitting. I pulled out my headphones and stared at the door, not quite believing it could be that guy again. Then as I went to stand, 4 more loud bangs shuddered through the door. At this point, I had had enough if it was him, which I assumed it was. What the hell was his problem now? I rushed to the door and opened it, and again, I come face to face with the guy from next door, pacing outside of mine. At this point, I wasn't in any mood to take any shit, so in an annoyed tone I said, "What?" The guy stopped pacing as he stood right in front of me again, just staring for a while. I could clearly see his pupils were dilated, and I noticed his sweaty, greying skin. "I can hear you again. What the fuck did I tell you about the noise and if I had to come back?" He aggressively spat at me. The guy was crazy. I hadn't made any kind of noise all night. Frankly, at that point, I was angry with all the attitude and the false accusations he was blaming me for. My adrenaline beginning to pump as I knew I had to stand my ground. I said, "Listen, I don't know what the hell you're talking about, but I'm not making any noise, so you need to fuck off. And if you continue with your aggressive and threatening behavior, I'll call the cops, okay?" As I said what I said, nerves began to creep in, as I saw the way the guy stared at me, how he looked like he hated me. I told him I was going and slowly began to shut my door. As I did, I heard him say, "Oh, you'll be sorry." His door slammed as he went back to his apartment. Kind of freaked out by what he meant by that, I made sure my door was locked too. I headed to bed thinking about what I was going to do if this continued, already dreading the next night. It didn't take me long to drift off that night, but I was soon woken to the sound of what seemed like a crashing sound, coming from my apartment. Luckily I'm a light sleeper, and shot up to listen. I could hear movement in my apartment, the sound of someone walking around. My heart began to race as I knew fully well someone was inside. As I was about to get up, I froze. As footsteps stopped right outside my bedroom door, my door handle began to rotate as someone tried to get in. The sound of the door unclicking sent a shiver down my spine as fear took over. As I mentioned, I live in a dodgy area, so I always sleep with a bat by my bed. and at that moment I reached for it, gripping it tight. I stood up as my bedroom door creaked open, and as I turned the light on next to my bed, to my horror it lit up my next door neighbor, standing in my doorway. Not only standing there, but holding a knife. The hairs on my neck stood up. As I screamed at him, what the hell was he doing? It was then he bellowed at me. He told me I'd be sorry, breaking out into a run as he lunged at me. Fearing for my life, I swung the bat before he could get any closer, as I made clean contact with his arm, knocking the knife out of his hand. Not wasting another second, I swung it again, as it struck him on the side of the head, knocking him to the floor. He was knocked out. I ran out of my room as I grabbed the phone, calling the police, explaining to them what had happened. They arrived pretty soon, as I waited outside my apartment, too afraid to stay inside, so I kept an eye on the door. They found the man where I had left him, in my room, still unconscious. When they got him to come round, they arrested him for breaking and entering with the intent to cause physical harm. The look in that man's eyes that night was filled with hatred. If I hadn't have woken up that night, I'm pretty sure he would have taken my life as I slept. It was found he'd had a history of assault charges, and had been in and out of prison on those and drug-related offences. I'm currently looking for a new place to live, as after that night, I really don't feel safe in my own home, or even living in that area anymore. We hope you enjoyed delving into these creepy encounters with us. What situation would have terrified you the most if you were in that position? Let us know in the comments. As always, please like, comment and share, as it really helps the video and the channel out. And if you haven't already, subscribe and join the world of horror motives for more chilling horror content, and drop some suggestions of topics you would like to hear in the future. Thanks for listening. Until next time, fear lies within.